I recently read a wonderful article about how happiness is at least as much anticipation as it is what you end up doing. If you set up things and you anticipate them, they may turn out to be better in the anticipation than they were in the reality, but the anticipation gives us happiness. So yes, I think hope is tied to happiness. It's Emily Dickinson, the bird that perches, the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. Yeah.
It's really hard to believe that it's been 42 years since we started it. I mean, the time has flown. And that's maybe because we've worked hard, really hard every day over those years, and because we've accomplished so much.
I was diagnosed when I was 27.
A recent poll asked people which diseases they most feared. Among those at the top of the list was blindness, ranked second only behind cancer.
You don't know what the other side looks like or what it feels like or what it is like. So you imagine the worst. I mean, I think that's why blindness is probably the second most feared disease, even though it's not terminal. And that's because it's such an unknown, what's on the other side of that curtain when it falls.
Retinitis pigmentosa is the leading cause of inherited retinal degeneration-associated blindness. 1 out of every 4,000 people in the United States alone are affected by this condition.
We're down on the Cape. That was the first time I noticed that he had an eye problem. We had been at a party for a very short time. We decided to walk back to the boat and wait for our friend who had taken us to the party. And he tripped over, 3 or 4 rocks and things walking. And I thought, this is really bizarre. He hasn't had anything to drink, hardly. And so then Gordon talked about it and said that at night, it was sort of like, gee whiz, well, I don't know. I find I don't see very well at night anymore.
We all, as human beings, believe that the ingenuity of humans will make happen what we can imagine. Just think about that. It'll make happen what we can imagine.
Gordon is courteous to the end, and I tried to be the same, but I felt I had to tell him the truth, that he had his own life to lead, a second child on the way, and I remember even saying, if you have time and there's any part of the world you haven't seen, see the world.
Will people be able to look into the faces and see the details of the faces of the people they love and of their friends? I mean, that's possible. That's very exciting.
I'd lost all my night vision. I couldn't drive at night. I couldn't move around very well. And then in 1970, my day vision started to go very rapidly, much more atypical than usually is the case. I could almost notice one day to the next some change in my field of vision. I mean, when I'd read the paper, I could read it in paragraphs or a book and see almost the whole page, and then I went down to lines and then words, and then by the end of October of 1970, I could see just letters, and then that was gone.
And now I think we can say going forward, not only do we provide hope, we provide healthy eyesight to a lot of people, and we're going to increase the amount of that. Saving and restoring sight, and we're doing it now. Thank you.
Life throws us curveballs. It's an accepted fact. The question isn't if something bad will ever happen, it's how will we handle it when it does. For Gordon Gund, the curveball was going blind. This is a story of the extraordinary way in which he chose to handle it.
He never wanted to be blind in the sense that he didn't want to learn how to be blind. He had thought about going to a school in Massachusetts where if you're not completely blind, they put blinders on you. They teach you how to be blind. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to keep his sense of vision that he'd had up until that time intact.
When you're losing your sight and it's progressive, you can still see some parts of and then just shades of what you used to see. It's you try and deal each day with what you have, and then what you have changes. So it's a constant adjustment and very difficult because it's very hard to start something that you expect will take some time to bring to fruition and not know whether you're going to be able to be part of it or to make it work. But it taught me how difficult it is to know where you really are till it's all gone.
In 1965, after serving for 5 years as commander on board the destroyer USS, Gordon would follow his father's wishes and try his hand at banking. Accepted into an elite program at Chase Manhattan, Gordon would receive his training alongside no fewer than 5 future CEOs of the nation's largest companies. But more important than who he met at Chase while in training, he would meet the most important partner of his life.
Of course, very much at the top of it all is my relationship with my trophy bride that I married in 1966, and happily I married my trophy bride the first time around because we're still married 47 years later, despite the fact that blindness came in and imposed a whole different set of dynamics on our relationship.
In the beginning, this romance would blossom in the most unusual of ways. Gordon would steal her carpool.
I brought a Volkswagen up to New York, and I had a carpool from 86th Street down to Wall Street, where we were both working at the time. And it was, I think I had 2 or 3 people in it to start with. And so Gordon said, that he'd like to be in it. Well, about the 4th ride down the East River Drive, he said, the assembled crowd in my car, well, I have the ugliest pea green Pontiac station wagon, but it is comfortable. If you all would like to use that, I'd be happy to use it. So he absconded with my carpool and my wherewithal. It was pea green, and it was ugly, and we had it for many years until we had it in Brooklyn Heights when it got broken into about 3 times in front of our apartment. Finally, somebody stole it. So that was great.
The relationship with my mother had a lot to do with keeping him afloat during that time, and her ability to stick by him and tell him that she would be there for the long term. I think was probably an extremely comforting factor while going through all that.
You think of hitting that type of rock bottom and really going through something like that, and if you can survive it, your relationship is that much stronger. And I think they chose to really fight through it, and so that created a bond that I think a lot of married couples don't have.
This gets to the point of whether if my dad had not lost his sight and he'd stayed in the training program with all these high-powered guys and gone on to do all these crazy things, would he have had the marriage that he has? And I'm not so sure that would be the case. I think there's an interdependence that's been developed because of the blindness that also has created a real sense of love. So.
At the very beginning, I kept wanting to say, it's going to be okay. It'll be fine. We'll work this. And then I remember one evening saying to him, I thought hard about it. And it would really annoy me to have somebody sitting with me every evening say, it's going to be okay.
My mom's telling him that things would be all right, I think is for a long time is probably part of human nature, right? So if you love someone, you want them to know that it's going to be all right. But I also think, you hear this about addiction and things like that, where people have to first recognize that they have a disease before they can move ahead. So if she was constantly telling him he'd be okay, I don't think they were able to really get past it. And so when part of the whole process was saying, it's a crappy deal.
Well, there was a point where Luli went to Gordon, and Luli said to Gordon, you decide whether you're going to live with blindness or not. And if you wanted to go out and shoot yourself, you could do that. But if you decide you're going to live with blindness, you live with it. And I will support you 100%. And that was a critical point.
And I remember saying to him, I think it's a really, really bad deal. Not even that delicate a word, but, if it's more than you can stand, I understand that. But if you can stand it and want to move ahead, let's go for it. And then just let's believe it's going to work.
Well, Gordon wouldn't be who he is without Luli. He might not be. That's elaboration enough.
If you wish to understand Gordon Gunn, you must first understand who his father was. George Gund17st was the son of German immigrants. He would attend Harvard, graduating from the first class of Harvard Business School in 1909. A brilliant and fearless entrepreneur, he would strike out on his own, amassing a fortune, first in real estate, then ranching, and finally banking. His greatest coup would be to secure the patent for decaffeinated coffee.
He was, in many ways, larger than life. He was someone who, it always seemed to me, would speak the thing that other people wouldn't. In business terms, that made him very effective because he was the one that they would go to when he was on a board of directors for tasks that others would not so readily do.
As a father, he was a strict disciplinarian, exacting his own impossibly high standards upon his children, particularly the boys. Much of this pressure would be placed squarely on the shoulders of eldest son and namesake George III. So great became the pressure of being the eldest Gunn that at 17, George would run away. Gordon had always had a natural attraction to challenges, so when his brother fled, Gordon happily picked up the mantle.
He was the son of the four of us that my father wished he had been. And he had a great personality. He was always pushing boundaries. And he did all the things that my father hoped he could have done. He went to Groton, to boarding school. He was an undergraduate at Harvard. He joined the Porcellian Club. He, after graduating, he went into OCS and became an officer in the Navy in the Pacific. And then he came back and he got married early and he had children early, and none of those things I ever did.
I believe I won the ovarian lottery. And by that I mean that, sure, I inherited a retinal degenerative disease and as a result have lost my eyesight. But I had two very loving parents who cared a great deal about each one of my siblings and me. Were very loving and wanted us to have the very best education we could have, wanted us to learn about a higher purpose and about what really did matter.
Going blind was not the first great tragedy in Gordon's life. When Gordon was just 12 years old, his mother fell ill to cancer.
When my mother became ill with cancer and was not given a long time to live, they decided to send some of us away to school, so I went away to a boarding school. And then as a result of her being quite ill and near to death for several years, she taught me a lot about keeping on. She'd go in for treatments. In those days, they were pretty crude. Very heavy chemicals and no kind of chemotherapy and certainly no surgery was done to speak of, and most people didn't live very long with cancer. And she just kept going and never let you know.
She taught you to fight. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is.
In 1968, Gordon and Luli were married. Gordon would ask his father to be his best man. He never told his father about his diagnosis.
I had been diagnosed I didn't tell him. 'Cause I didn't really know how he would take it. A lot of people take it onto themselves, a genetic thing. You know, it's suddenly like they're responsible, they're to blame. That's crazy. I didn't want him to know about that.
You know, at that time, it was really hard to figure out what was going on. There wasn't much information out there. Doctors didn't seem to know. And as it got to be worse, he had a hard time figuring out exactly what it was because there was so little interest in quality of life diseases.
I had an instance where a family doctor, I went to see him and he looked in my eyes, he talked with me about it, he said, you know, I think you ought to see a psychiatrist. So I did, and the psychiatrist, after several sessions, said to me, well, Gordon, you're like everybody else, you know, with a mouthful of teeth. Some of them aren't as good as the rest of them. But I don't think that's your problem. I think you should see an ophthalmologist.
In 1970, Elliot Burson at the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary was one of the few doctors in the world who could identify Gordon's condition.
When I looked in Gordon's eye, it was a harrowing experience for me because it was very hard to find any spicular pigment. I looked twice, and of course that was, I knew, a very bad prognostic sign.
What struck me was how little knowledge there was about these diseases. And so as Luli and I looked around more and more frenetically to try and find a way to slow or stop the progress, I found dead end after dead end.
Well, retinal degenerations in 1970 on some level were considered rare diseases. Part of the rareness was that people went to a hospital, were told they had the problem, there was no hope, and they should just go home. And so many people with RP were naturally feeling very lonely and wondering if anybody was interested in their problem.
But Gordon refused to accept that nothing could be done. He would try anything.
Well, I had a faith healer who worked with me for a time in England. You know, what the heck? I was in London, I'd try it.
There was someone who did these 100 bee stings, 5 days a week.
Some people thought that transplanting muscles in the back of the eye to increase the circulation might help. There was a theory that if you cut the sympathetic fibers in the neck, you would dilate the vessels on that side of the head and perhaps improve the blood flow.
There was a treatment in Cuba that was purported to work, and it's one of those things. The placebo effect was so strong that the people who spent their life savings were taking a real risk with their, not just their eyesight, but their health.
Well, and then there was Russia.
An article placed in New York Times by the Filatov Institute, located in Odessa, Russia, purported to have a cure for retinitis pigmentosus. Gordon, having seen the article, called Elliot Burson and asked if he thought if it had any real merit.
There had been an attempt with placental extract in the Soviet Union to try to save function, and although it didn't have a proven scientific track record, I believe as a compassionate human being, every person should have a chance to try things, even if it's, so to speak, a last Hail Mary pass, as we would say.
I think I would say that it was really a leap of faith and kind of what he thought at the time, again, family lore, was that it was a treatment that would work.
I think it's human nature to always want something to hang on, to hope for, and that was certainly my case. And I'd build it up in my own mind that this treatment might be the answer. It was the only one left.
And he'd worked with the State Department, and they were trying to clear it. It was a difficult time in the Cold War. It was during the Vietnam War. It was 1970.
My brother Graham very kindly took me over. Luli had just had Zachary, our youngest son, and just a few weeks before. Unfortunately, I did get to see him, before I lost all of my sight, and I'll never forget that.
Unbeknown to Gordon, it would be the last time he saw his children. The plan was to go to the Filatov Institute for a 4-day regimen of injections, but when he arrived, he found out that the stay would be much longer.
Gordon had said he would call me right away when he got there. And then I went 4 days and thinking he'd be home even by then without hearing anything from him. And I didn't even know we couldn't locate him. And so I think the panic, I really got scared that something awful had happened.
The intended 4-day stay at the Filatov Institute in Odessa evolved into a harrowing yet transformative 6-week journey.
That was a very important time in my beginning to learn to deal with blindness. I couldn't even find my way to the bathroom, just to give you an idea. And the place was in pretty bad shape. I mean, the walls had crumbling paint. It had bare light bulbs hanging down from the ceiling. It hadn't had a lot of attention.
He was in a room where there were, it was like our single room in the hospital. I think there were 8 beds. They were all just jammed in. There was urine all over the floor. It was kind of grim.
And then they would give you animal biostimulants. I mean, one of them was an extract of placenta in shots. So I had 12, 15 injections a day. And I had them in my temples. They were in my buttocks and my shoulders and shoulder blades, and trying to get these extracts of animal biostimulants into my bloodstream.
There was a particular woman that gave them what they were called injeccies, the shots, and we had just started bombing Hanoi, and so she would say Yexi and say Vietnam and hit him with the needle. I think I was just amazed. We were at the mercy of whatever they did.
He was over there so long, and his brother had to come back for exams. And so I went over to join him and help him come home. It was frightening. I think the fact, not just that he'd lost weight, but his color was pale. I just thought, oh goodness, this isn't a good place to be. No, we got to get home.
When Lily came over and I had left, he went into a coma. She was very afraid he'd be given something which would make things worse. So he finally came out of the coma, and then they decided maybe they'd done everything they could.
I think he had hope when he went to Russia, but he lost hope.
I think he literally lost it that month in Russia?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
After all failed attempts to find a cure, Gordon is left to figure out how and where he fits in.
It's made him capable of seeing things in a deeply human way that I don't think people do always see, even when they're sighted at all.
So I took a lot of time thinking about, most of all, what really mattered to me in my life.
You have to put it in the context of the time, and that, your image of a blind person at the time is not somebody who's out there doing a lot of stuff, especially if you've been the guy who's out there doing a lot of stuff.
The kind of stereotypical view that blindness meant you had no other value to offer. I have had times when somebody in a restaurant, a server at the table might come over and we've ordered coffee, and then they'll turn to Luli and say, well, would he like sugar in his coffee or cream? And I have to think, well, wait a second, you could ask me, I can answer that question.
Gordon rejected any stereotype or societal restraints.
You can either wring your hands and worry about it and wonder why me, and am I, who's going to take care of me, or how am I going to exist? Or you can say, well, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to find a way around it. I'm going to work around it, find a way to do the things I want to do, that I feel I can do, in the best way I can.
I realized in a way it was I mean, it sounds terrible to say, but a gift, because all during the period when everybody was thinking they should be chairman of the board of Merrill Lynch or something like that, all of a sudden we were a team trying to work on something.
I'd always thought, well, because I have some resources, if I am successful in building a business, that it would just be because I had this leg up or opportunity from birth. And now all of a sudden that didn't matter. And so it was freeing in that way too, in the sense that I didn't have to be, it didn't matter anymore what people thought about what I might have had in the way of an edge or an opportunity that was given to me, because now there was something that wasn't given to them that I had to deal with.
It changed his view on what he could be in life. And I think that was, so if Russia is the bottom, this is the start of the rise when he met Jim Wheat.
Jim Wheat had also lost his sight to retinitis pigmentosa at the age of 25, but with a brilliant mind and an indomitable spirit, he had managed to take his father's boutique brokerage firm in downtown Richmond and turn it into one of the nation's major players. The firm was Wheat First Securities. One of Gordon's doctors suggested he meet Jim Wheat. On that very day of the doctor's suggestion, Gordon and Lulie desperately engineered a meeting in Jim Wheat's office.
My dad left the doctor's office and called Wheat Securities and got on the phone with Jim Wheat's assistant. And I think what Jim Wheat told him was, look, I'm too busy, but you can come up and sit in my office if you want and listen to how I work.
For me, he was the most dramatic, example of hope. I mean, not just hope, but he never did get his sight back, but didn't stop him. He was hugely successful. He enjoyed the things in his office and the view overlooking the Rappahannock, even though he couldn't see it, but he could describe it to you in detail. And I began to think, oh, blind doesn't mean just a black and white life. Where, I had been told that to help Gordon get all white shirts and dark suits so he could match it together.
I think it was one of those where that meeting and getting to know him planted a seed that over time developed into this idea of, wait, I can do this, and was a true sort of example of what he could do.
Jim Wheat's visual, the fact that he surrounded himself with paintings and a beautiful view it's not surprising that had an impact on my dad.
My dad is similar, he has paintings and pictures up in his office, and I think he learned that from seeing Jim Wheat and seeing, okay, I don't need to sort of pull the shades and put my sunglasses on and sit there in a dark room for the rest of my life.
He'll often ask us to describe a sunset or a view, and he loves the descriptions.
As Gordon adjusted to life without his sight, some adjustments were more difficult than others. The constant feeling that people were tiptoeing around him and treating him with kid gloves left him feeling unsettled and depressed. But a chance encounter with an ill-tempered woman on the streets of Cleveland would give him just the boost he needed.
It was a snowy, ice-cold day, and he's going to the bank, and inadvertently his cane hit this woman's heel, and the woman just turned around and said, you goddamn blind Polak bastard. And Gordon said to her, oh my goodness, have a good day. Because she was just so mad, but he was so happy that instead of somebody saying, oh my gosh, I've just said something terrible to a blind man, she just went on, you know, as he went down the block after it. And he thought, yes! No, they don't feel sorry for me a bit. She's mad as hell.
Gordon learns to navigate a new life with no limitations.
I don't think kids mean to be mean, but kids are just so forthright. I mean, they just say it like it is. So I can remember, you know, times when you'd hear one kid say, well, how can you play baseball? Your dad couldn't teach you to play baseball. He can't throw a ball, you know, or he can't catch a ball. Or so I think that there's a period in the childhood where it's hard. And also just our boys are both fantastic about going with Gordon anywhere, you know, on the elbow. And it's now, when you're grown, it's fine. But when you're 13.
I made up stories of how he went blind. I found it hard doing some of the youth sports, ice hockey, having him come to a practice or coaching, and that was never easy to sort of know what you were missing out on.
He did a masterful job of thinking of things that we could do together. So fishing, for example, became something, and it is to this day, something that we love to do together as a family.
I remember seeing him once with Zach and Grant and some kids when they were quite young. And he was playing baseball, and they were throwing him pitches. Then he would be told when to swing the bat. And so he was right there doing it all with them as the kids were growing up.
They all used to make Gordon come up on our pond when it froze and make him be the goalie. That's like a sick joke.
And I was the easiest goalie they'll ever face. When the pond would freeze and we'd go up and they'd be skating, it was a lot of fun, actually. But I tried to stay involved with whatever they were doing any way I could, and could without making them feel really embarrassed or destroying their love of whatever it was.
It's obviously very different having a blind parent, but when it's all you know, you sort of, that's what you have. So I try not to think of it as something that makes me really different. It's more, makes me who I am.
Gordon had always been a vigorously active person. Once Gordon had decided to make a go of things, he did not limit his ambitions to the business world. He would reclaim all his former passions and activities: fishing, swimming, running, even skiing.
I can remember, this may have been during the part where she was trying to say, bring normalcy, and I can remember her packing us up in the car and taking my dad to a neighborhood that didn't have a lot of traffic, and then he'd get out, and he was literally running beside the car for exercise. And so people would be walking down the street, and here's this crazy woman in her car with two kids yelling out the window at a guy who's running beside the car, telling him not to step on the manhole or whatever. And so we were just, that was part of growing up.
I've skied with Gordon, which is really very annoying. I'm lying in a huddle and he's going down the mountain and running into people and saying, why is that man wearing a sign that says blind skier? He obviously can see, otherwise he couldn't ski like that.
I think we've been clamming with him, I've been boating with him, I've been lots of places with him. He just never lets his disability intrude.
We are only beginning to understand how the brain adapts to losing one of your senses. As Gordon adjusted to a life with no sight, he wasn't just acquiring new skills. Scientists now know actual physiological changes were likely occurring in his brain.
All his other senses changed dramatically as he lost his eyesight. His memory improved tremendously. Suddenly he could remember hundreds of telephone numbers. He could walk into a room and describe the room without seeing it. And I remember I used to go to him, with him, to Museum of Modern Art in New York, and when he had no eyesight, and we'd talk about paintings. And he just wanted to make sure he could register the color and keep that intact.
In 1978, Gordon purchased a seaside home in Nantucket. Along with the home came an unexpected bonus. Caretaker Gilbert Burchell, better known as Gibby.
Well, my dad was sort of like the tour guide to the Gunns when they bought the house. He showed them all kinds of new things, the clamming, the fishing, really showed Gordon and the rest of the family how to enjoy Nantucket.
Gib was sort of a third-generation Nantucketer and very, almost a Renaissance man in a way. And it used to drive him crazy when we first bought the house that Gordon would always be, when he was up there, working.
Gordon was actually he's got an office at the end of the house, and he was on that telephone an awful lot. And I think, you know, my dad was a little bit older than Gordon, and he thought he should enjoy something else to do with his hands instead of always working with his mind.
And he thought this just isn't right. So he came one day and said to Gordon, "Gordon, you ought to come down here and try carving."
Next thing I knew, Gordon had a sort of a blocky whale in his hand, and he started shaping it with chisels and rasps and sandpaper. And then he got into some power tools, and the whales got a little bloodier.
And the white pine will absorb all blood.
Yeah, there's a lot of skin and probably some blood spots on this. But yeah, Gordon started, I believe, with this very whale, and it went from there.
Once I've got a sense of what I want to do, it's all in my head. I actually turn it around. I look at it inside my head from every angle so that I have a feeling for how it might look if you were looking at it from behind it or one side or the other or underneath or up above.
And so he brings that thinking about what he's going to do to approach the salmon or the frog or the bird, and he dreams of it at night. But in the morning he gets up, and that dream is all he has, and that image in his mind is all he has, and he goes to work with it. And in some ways, it's a blessing for that kind of art.
He gets a feeling into his sculpture. Particularly, there's a combination of abstractness and reality, which together make for very compelling sculptures.
Oh, no question, sculpting helps me stay in touch with the world, and also really with myself, because it's a lot of fun. And the textures, whether it's wood or it's clay or it's stone, and it's very absorbing. I put some music on, various kinds, and I'll go for hours.
I think the tactile part of it is something that, you know, he just really felt like he could do, and there's an independence to it that he doesn't have in anything else in his life. I mean, he can go, and he does spend hours in his studio just either carving or molding clay, and he just loves it.
We don't have do not touch signs up because he wants people to touch his work. That's how he works. And he has a combination of realism and almost abstraction in his work. And I think people begin to see the depth of the art when they touch it and understand that indeed he's an artist, but he happens to be blind. He's not a blind artist.
It's a mixture of the past, present things I touch and what I do with it in my head.
Gordon's training at Chase taught him that sound business decisions required a complete and thorough understanding of the underlying numbers. But how would this be possible without sight? He would have to test the very limits of his improved memory.
He would always be there to put us to bed and do all that, but then he would go down to his office, sit in darkness, and listen to tapes for hours of people reading financial statements into a tape recorder. And I think he's often the most well-prepared person at a meeting, and it's because of the preparation. So he is, if there are sayings from my father that I remember, you have to prepare is one of the things that always rings through when we were growing up.
When Gordon believes what's right, there's virtually no stopping him to get there. When he believes what's right, when he believes that what something ought to be, and after all the input is in, and after everyone's given him what his opinion is, he makes it happen. He'll make it happen.
I think the great thing about Gordon is he's a tremendously thoughtful person. You think about different people, some are high energy, high intelligence, and so on. Gordon is all those things and has tremendous wisdom. He understands when to make a point, how best to make the point, and to do it in a way that drives the discussion forward.
I would say Gordon is an angler. And an angler to me is somebody that can connect the dots. And Gordon is a dot connector. And he can put the puzzles together in the simplest way, cut through the baloney, and kind of see the path going forward. And he's a magician at doing that.
This is a person who overcomes difficulty and has the character to stick with things that he cares about, even though they get very difficult. And this attitude sort of spreads to others.
He is meticulous in understanding all facts of any transaction or any business. He brings a combination of investment bankers, operators, and almost a CFO's understanding to the transaction. And he has a pretty good judgment set with respect to human nature. So he's really a terrific businessman. My first impression of Gordon was that, number one, he has affected so many mannerisms that he looks right at you, and it takes a while for the uninitiated to say, this guy is blind. And then he says something like, which invariably, I don't know if this is a family film, but invariably pisses you off, that he says, on page 6, footnote 3, is this guy kidding me? And that's the way he was and has been for the 30 years that I've known him.
Getting the best results, getting the right thing and doing the right thing and doing it the right way is what sort of his presence motivates you to do. I've never seen Gordon treat anybody without the utmost respect, no matter how much a rat somebody was. And we've had to deal with some rats in our time, or how bad the situation was. Gordon always seemed to find the way to get to the high road and influence the people involved in it to get to that high road.
Gordon will improve almost everybody he works with. That's just the sort of person he is. He takes a lot of interest in the individuals. And the team was important, the basketball players, the general manager, everybody was important. But when you walk into the building, you'll see who else is important to Gordon. That's the usher, the security officer, the driver. When he walks through the building, you'll have folks calling out, hi, Mr. Gunn, the whole way along.
I would say one thing that he has been able to do with his blindness is really see people for their qualities. And that sounds trite, but it's true. He sees people in a different way. He's not focused on their physical appearance.
When Gordon first met me, during the time he met him, he had me running his companies, and I weighed 450 pounds. And it was okay with Gordon. Now he would, if you wanted to get rid of it or something, it was all right, but he didn't see that as a big impairment. There aren't many executives of his stature who would have sort of glossed over that and said, well, as long as the results are good, as long as we feel how you're doing right, why, we'd be all right. So that's a real tribute to Gordon, too.
When you talk to him, he's looking straight at you. He knows where you are in the room. You would have absolutely no idea that he can't see you. He's turned it from what could be a disadvantage into a great advantage. He is, if not even more effective, because he's not distracted by anything. He's very focused on what he needs to get done.
He must hear three-dimensionally. in some way, that he hears body language and he hears the information from someone's voice and he hears what's not being said.
I think people don't know sometimes what they're communicating audibly. And they're trying to communicate something very different visually, because that's how they're used to cueing people and trying to get things across in a visual way, how they look, how they react, how their body language, what their body language is, a lot of things that are lost on me. And yet what I am hearing are a lot about what they really think, what they really feel.
You know, the thing about Gordon is, when you think about a Renaissance man, in many ways, that's exactly what he is. I remember reading about Renaissance men, but I hadn't really met one. But with him, we have, right? He's a spectacular businessman, not only a good investor, but actually a good manager of enterprises. This is an accomplished artist. This is a great philanthropist. This is a great husband, a great father, and a fast friend.
There's a purity of Gordon's intentions that are just unmistakable. And it's not, and you get it early, but if you deal with him over a period of time, it amazes you how it's there all the time.
And I was saddened, of course, when he decided to sell the team, but he actually, I think, wanted to spend even more time with a combination of his grandchildren and his foundation, the foundation.
The Foundation is Foundation for Fighting Blindness, which is unmistakably Gordon's ultimate passion.
I think he hopes to find a cure to retinal degenerative diseases, full spectrum, all of them. And I think that's his, I know that that's the biggest accomplishment for him, that he could achieve. And that's the one that he holds out there.
Foundation Fighting Blindness was founded as the National Retinitis Pigmentosa Foundation in 1971 by Gordon and Lully and a few other dedicated leaders.
We got very lucky early on. We had not only a rallying cry, which was the first multidisciplinary laboratory for the study of these diseases. There wasn't any such thing then, even though there were a lot of disciplines that played into this. We found a doctor, Elliot Burson, who had the idea of putting together the first laboratory, and that became the initial focus for the foundation.
The theory behind the lab is that more would be done by a group of scientists working together with different disciplines than anyone could do by themselves.
The field was really barren when we started. The landscape had no one else in it, and we just plugged away at it. And so we had to start from the beginning and bring in people, attract them in with career development awards and postdoc fellows. And as we started raising money for that, we began to understand how many people out there were desperate for this same kind of opportunity, for this kind of research and for the result of it. We got inspired by them, more and more inspired, and we also got inspired by people that we were able to bring into the Scientific Advisory Board.
Gordon's fierce determination and dedication to this foundation was motivated by the pure desire that no one else should go through what he did when he was told that he was going to go blind.
One of the things, though, that has always struck me, because I've met a lot of people who are blind and in some cases blind and deaf, is I am in awe of what they do every day in their lives. And so that really inspires me. And it means that if I have the resources that I have, and I'm fortunate enough to have them, that I've got to do even more.
That's kind of everything in my mind, is the notion that suddenly what you thought your life was going to be is drastically different, and at the same time you find a real purpose, which for him throughout my life has been this desire to find a cure for not just his own blindness, but everybody.
I'm continually impressed at the number of people that I run into who are running to Russia for an eye injection or getting bee sting injections into their eyes or ozone therapy. I don't understand the biological basis of any expectation of improvement from those kind of approaches, but what these stories show to me is the desperation that these people have. That seeing their vision disappearing and losing their sight is so scary, so terrifying and devastating that they're willing to try anything.
That's a big reason why the foundation from the very beginning was really strictly dedicated to scientifically based research. Because if we were going to offer that kind of hope, we had to do it from a base of scientific knowledge.
I think what he has more than maybe he ever had was a sense that he has a real worth in the world, so that he won't ever have to answer to people and say, you're the rich guy who got the job at the chase, running the chase, or the guy who is doing this because of the wealth you had growing up. He can now say that he had a pretty lousy hand, and he was able to take that and create a foundation that's, I think, on the verge of curing blindness.
And I think the Foundation Fighting Blindness is the voice of reason, telling people what things are quackery and what things are promising, and whether it'd be better to hold off and wait another year to try something which is on the burner versus go out and try something that's totally untested and has no scientific basis for it.
You know, our dream, and Gordon says it best, is nobody will ever have to hear with a diagnosis of an inherited retinal degeneration, go home, learn Braille, get a guide dog, get a screen reader. No, what they're going to hear, oh, yeah, you have this, but we've got a treatment for that and you don't have to worry.
The Foundation has always been willing to take chances on stuff a little outside the box, proposals a little outside the box. Sometimes it doesn't work, but other times it's a quantum leap in getting to the treatments and cures.
When I think about what's changed with the possibilities of treating retinitis pigmentosa, I really find myself sort of reaching for metaphors such as avalanches or exploding stars, and I've never really, and I won't even try to come up with a better metaphor. I can simply say, we have said from day one that when we understand these diseases well enough, we'll be able to provide treatments. But I would have to say candidly, most of us who said that, although we have faith in the future, knew that that was off distant science fiction. And I would say as recently as the year 2000, it was still science fiction that there might be treatments. We are in 2013, and there's gene therapy which has shown success. There are stem cell therapies which have shown success. There are other forms of drug-related therapies which have shown success for treating retinitis pigmentosa. All of that has been brought into existence by the Foundation Fighting Blindness.
They're merging. Fact and fiction are definitely merging in this age of modern genetic medicine.
Our goal is to go out of business. Our goal is to pack up shop. We've taken care of it. Nobody's ever going to go blind due to inherited retinal degeneration.
The years of FFB's efforts finally pay off in 2001 when Lancelot, a blind dog, regains his sight with gene therapy treatment.
I think the news of a dog being able to see was exciting because he could tell a lot of folks that, look, we're on the right track. And for all you people who've been with me for 30 years, we're on the right track.
That was really the moment where a lot of that hard work and those years and years of trying paid off, or at least gave the glimmer of hope that it was going to pay off.
It put a wind in everyone's sails as it related to the foundation. And you go to these events for the foundation, and they get old, but But when you hear that, and that puts all these dinners and auctions and things in perspective, that the money went to finding a cure for blindness in a dog, and look what's come of that. So then now we're in human trials on a number of things, and that's just, that's really exciting.
Hard problems don't yield easily. Hard problems, take effort. It's that great Edison quote that most people miss opportunity because it's dressed in overalls and looks a lot like hard work, right? I think that's a great thing. It's a great example about Gordon. I mean, Gordon tends not to miss opportunities just because it's dressed in overalls and it looks like hard work. He tends to go towards those because he realizes that's where great accomplishments happen.
So the success of Lancelot took them further down the road. Scientists began running human trials to remedy the same gene defect that caused Lancelot's blindness. But this time, it was in a child.
To all of us here at Children's Hospital, one of the most exciting times in the Phase 1/2 study was the enrollment of one of the first younger subjects, a little boy who was 8 years old.
You aren't always able to extrapolate results from animal studies to human studies. So there was that little question mark, and of course, anxiety, maybe, particularly with a child. But it was a great story. It worked.
It feels almost biblical. And even when you're witnessing it, it's just, for me, a little hard to completely take in.
It's almost like you can taste it. I feel it. I mean, there are already some therapies out there for some of these diseases that are really helping people. And there are many more. Really, we're on the threshold of a tremendous number of breakthroughs. So knowing that is part of why I fight as hard as I do and why I continue to. I really feel we're on the cusp of making a huge difference to millions of people around the world.
So do I think that finding these treatments for the rare form of retinitis pigmentosa will have application elsewhere in society? Absolutely yes, and I can already give you significant examples where advances in treating retinitis pigmentosa are now being tried to treat brain disorders, are now being tried to treat hearing disorders. You're seeing a kind of flowing out from the specific forms of treatments to the whole world of now medical genetic diseases, which affect millions of people, and more complex diseases. So there's a tremendous almost you might call it the Velcro effect with the space program. We went to the moon and brought a couple rocks back, but we also brought all sorts of technologies to the planet which have transformed our lives. I think the same thing is happening in medicine through treatments of retinitis pigmentosa and treatments of inherited eye diseases in general.
I still maintain, and I think it's been true throughout the life of the foundation, that a rising tide lifts all the boats. And that's always been the case. If we can learn more about the retina and about the whole visual process, we're going to help everybody. We're going to go way beyond just one disease or another disease.
For me, the word hope has been replaced with the word promise, because we can see the end of the road now. We know we can affect these diseases. When Gordon first began with this, there was nothing. There was a shrug of the shoulders. And truly, he's the architect. He's the father of giving the experience to humanity that people can really change this world. It's not only the scientists that do it, but it's those that create the environment for these things to be done.
You know, everybody takes their own path when they are confronted with a particular obstacle in life, and a very hard obstacle to take on. Some people become bitter, some people become angry. Gordon went the other way. He saw it as a growth for him in his humanity.
He could have easily
just done projects related specifically to him. He had plenty of money, resources to do that. A lot of people go that way, that's not unusual, but he didn't do that. So all of his honesty, integrity, forthrightness, perseverance, intelligence, he put together and say, I'm going to take this case as far as I possibly can. I'm going to invite as many people to become involved in it, and we're going to press and press and press for solutions.
Gordon believed from day one that there would be treatments. And if you know anything about human affairs, you know there has to be a linchpin. There has to be a single person whose drive makes that happen. And in this case, that single person is Gordon.
And what is interesting is, whenever you met Gordon, whichever piece of his life you happen to be part of, he's universally described the same way. And anyone who overcomes difference and turns it somehow into a distinguishing part of their character that becomes part of their story, that then becomes part of other people's story, that then becomes this inspiring thing. I mean, being close to it is just, I don't know, it's a treat. I view my relationship with Gordon as being one of the more powerfully shaping relationships on what type of man I should try to be, rather than the type of man that I am.
Here he is. I don't even know if he knows his gene yet. And he certainly has not, to my knowledge at least, has not been involved in a clinical trial, which suggests that we still don't know enough about how to treat him. Yet he's so excited about hearing the progress with all of these other clinical trials, the Corey Haas story, all the other adults and children who are now being enrolled in other studies.
He has accepted this, and I don't, and it comes down to when we ask him whether he thinks he'll ever be able to see again, you know, or whether he's done this foundation, you know, to provide himself with hope that he might see. And he always deflects and says, no, it's really for the next generation. It's for the kids in the videos that you see when you go to these FFB events, these kids who are losing their sight, or the parents who are watching their kids lose their sight.
What are the needs that come from your particular set of circumstances? I would say it's a need for him to be the head of the foundation fighting blindness. The need is to find a cure. The need is to heal. The need for all of us is to heal.
As far as my kids are concerned, truly I don't know if the answers will be there in time. But it will for my grandchildren and for the grandchildren of others. And the incredible part of it to me is once these things are accomplished, they're forever. They will never go away.